Hey everyone, this is Mike, co-founder of Hummingbot. We're here with another live stream to showcase the capabilities that we continually add to the open source project. Recently, we've really tried to incorporate AI interfaces into Hummingbot. If you guys caught the last week's live stream, last week we basically did the first two. So we set up the environment using Hummingbot API as well as MCP. Before we get into it, I want to actually just reflect a little bit on this blog post that Anthropic published. It was about how they disrupted an AI orchestrated cyber attack aimed at targeting a lot of key US based government servers. And they believe it was sponsored by a Chinese state actor. Not going to get into the politics of all of this. I don't understand, really pay attention or care. But I think it's actually really interesting the way that they described how the perpetrators try to attack, how they use Claude Code, and really the process, like the phases that they set up in order to basically make this attack happen. One common misconception that people have when they start to build agents, they try to kind of build this magical agent that is kind of replace what a human can do. They expect go off on its own and do stuff for you. I think you'll find that it is very much an iterative process. It's not like you go from 0 to 1. You start with a very manual human operation. Kind of use AI to kind of help you initially just explore the space. Try to automate individual actions initially. And then after some period of time, then you can add more and more kind of complexity into it. And then eventually there is some type of automation that can happen where now it's going to go off and do strategies, do things on its own. But the human is always very much in the loop. The process actually is very time consuming because you're trying to kind of eliminate yourself from the process and have the agent operate on its own. But the reality is it's like the agent's not going to know how to do that without messing up. If you actually look at the description of this process in terms of how the cyber attack people did it, the first thing they did was they just basically explored the space using Claude Code. They used MCP servers to scan what attack vectors are available, find, basically collect data. That was basically phase 1 and 2, was basically essentially just data collection. Then phase 3 was about kind of trying to identify what vulnerabilities were out there. The code that they were running, a bit more agentic. It would try stuff, validate if it worked, and then report back to the human operator if it worked or not. So that's what they call this exploitation tool. Note that it says the human reviews the findings and directs further action. This is actually something that I'm very familiar with, having tried to automate lots of stuff with Hummingbot over the past few months with AI. The AI is going to start off in a very dumb way. It's very, very stupid. Add some more kind of intelligence or add some more things to your prompt, then it'll get kind of better and better. Finally, at phases 4 and 5, that's when this tool grown to a point where it can actually do stuff on its own. It can kind of self-heal. What we're building is obviously not a cyber attack bot. The overall premise is the same in that what you want out of an agent is something that can eventually kind of act on its own. But there is this kind of non-avoidable manual / human in the loop phase where it actually feels like you're not making much progress because most of the things you're doing initially with the agent, it's like you can just do yourself, more easily. But the key, I think, is you want to use AI for what it's really good at, which is initially it's about exploration. The AI can find and can just process a lot more data than a human can. In the middle phase, once you've kind of identified what your quotes, your strategy will be, then it's kind of like creating simple versions, kind of like creating a script or it's almost like a Hummingbot script. In phases 4 and 5, that's when you're actually kind of you're ready to create the real thing. So I say all this is to kind of where we are in the process of creating this DEX agent is actually more in the initial phases. Ideally, we do want to have something that's going to go off and run on its own. But before we do that, we need to make sure that it works in a very simple form. Last week, what we did was basically define the basic strategy, which was to collect fees by providing liquidity, coins that are new, that are not yet traded on a centralized exchange, and where a lot of the action is happening on concentrated liquidity exchanges like PancakeSwap. A lot of these pools do have rewards from Cake, constantly stay in the range, and just try to harvest the fees. It's actually a pretty simple strategy. I have actually been running the strategy myself, just manually over the past few months on higher quality tokens, and I have earned a decent APR. But I'm actually not sure if you go into the smaller coins, you try to create like very narrow ranges, and if you're doing a lot of rebalancing, will the fees and the rewards make up for your impermanent loss and your transaction costs? Today, what we're going to do is we're actually going to try to automate this process. The one thing to note here is that I do think transaction costs matter a lot. Transaction costs on PancakeSwap Solana are actually really high. They use like this NFT-based approach for positions. So when you create a position, you get an NFT, and then when you close a position, you burn that NFT. Because of that, you're actually losing like, I believe like 0.1 SOL on every time that you rebalance. When I was testing the strategy out, I realized was you actually don't want to run any type of HFT LP strategy on PancakeSwap Solana. So because of that, I'm actually going to use OR SOL pool in Meteora. The most liquid pool for OR right now is in Orca. There's 1.45 million liquidity there, and there's a bunch in Meteora as well. There's kind of like a trade-off. Do you want to be in a higher volume, lower fee pool and kind of trade more? Or do you want to be in a higher fee, higher bid pool that would trade less? We could just input the parameters here like this. Let's try to use MCP instead, and let's ask it to create a position. Open a position with about $10 worth OR and SOL. What I'm trying to test here is like, can the AI do it on its own? Unfortunately, yeah, we might have some versioning issues here. I wrote a script called manage position simple. What it does is it just it basically says, is there an existing position in a pool? If there is, it will monitor it. And then if the price is out of bounds for more than rebalance second, it will fully close the position and it will re-enter. It will only do a single-sided position. And let's just run the script. Let's try to make sure that the initial kind of automation works. Sol, and let's do Meteora. And then we have the pool over here on Gateway. Okay, so now the pool's there. So now we should be able to go and run the script. So let's start the script. Okay. So got the pool address. Yeah, so it's going to create a double-sided position. And submitted the position has failed. Okay, this did not work. Okay, so let's see why it failed. I forgot to update with my Helios key. Update RPC provider. All right, so that's the one-line action. Okay, so now restart Hummingbot. Failed again. Let's see what the issue is. Just try using API and doing it ourselves and see what the issue is. First, let's figure out our positions. Let's get the pool info for this position. Then we'll fetch the pool info. So let's try to create a position here. So first we'll quote the position, 0.06 to 1.16. I think I know what the issue is actually. I think it's an issue with the token itself. I'm going to create a position with the MET token. I'm just going to verify we can create a position in a different pool. So let me create a position in the MET pool. Actually, according to Claude, it was related to this Helios balances issue. I think this is actually a bug that I introduced recently. I think now it should work. Let's try to create this small position in Meteora just to see if Gateway actually works. This should work. If this doesn't work, we got some major problems because like this is working very well before. The other DEXs, at least in Solana, because they burn an NFT, it just adds more transaction costs when you're trying to open and close positions. Whereas Meteora uses a different model for the protocol. So when you open and close position, you basically pay very little in terms of burned costs. So I think I will try to make sure that this, I'm sure I can fix this bug. It's probably some weird liquidity provision config thing. But then, yeah, I think the goal is to kind of try to automate, make sure Meteora works correctly, and make sure that you can control it using the MCP server, so that users can just kind of like add liquidity on their own. And then I think the next stage is to kind of try to create a script that can automate it, and then eventually you have like an agent that can run that script. But getting like kind of like agentic behavior working properly is a multi-step process. And I think that's why I actually really enjoyed that article. I think the interesting observation process that you use to kind of like basically create a real freestanding, free-moving application. But I think this like initial phase where you're just kind of using AI to fetch data, I think is key. And then the second phase is like this hybrid of agent plus human, where the agent is doing something very simple and you're kind of like giving it, and all it's doing is trying one simple thing and it reports back to you what it does. I think is phase 2. And then the final phase is when you actually try to get the agent to actually take a more complex set of actions and then also report back to you. But I think every step of the way, the person is heavily involved. you're always kind of reviewing the findings and then kind of like fixing. Fortunately, today was not a very successful live stream because I basically didn't do anything besides just, plug away at these errors. But I feel like this is actually, I think, part of the process of kind of just creating a real agent. So hopefully this was helpful. Thanks for tuning in. I do think that we're making progress, and in a few months, we'll have something where you can basically automate